My name is Evelyn Marsh. I'm 43 years old. It was March 14, 2023, a Thursday, and the ballroom of the Coventry Hotel smelled like white lilies and money. 9:41 p.m. I was standing near the dessert table holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched when Gerald Voss crossed the room toward me with 3 men in dark suits trailing behind him. He'd had 2 glasses of scotch. I could tell because he got louder when he drank, and he was very loud. "Evelyn, gentlemen, this is the woman I was telling you about," he said, and he smiled the smile he used when he was about to make someone smaller. "The one who thinks a decade of clock punching makes her irreplaceable." The investors laughed politely because they didn't know yet. "People like her are the reason margins die," Gerald said, loud enough that the string quartet nearly stopped. "Loyalty is a word poor people invented to feel important. You're done here, Evelyn. Effective tonight. Consider it a favor, go find somewhere your mediocrity is celebrated." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't set my glass down hard or let my face move at all. I just took one slow sip of water and looked at the 3 men behind him, because I already knew 2 of them, and they already knew me. What Gerald didn't know, what he'd never once bothered to learn in the 4 years he'd run my company into my patience, was that the majority equity stake he'd been begging these men to protect had a name on the paperwork. And the name wasn't his. Before I tell you how a man fired me from a company I quietly owned, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning is a house on Delacroix Street in Akron, Ohio, where I grew up believing that the quietest person in the room was the one who saw everything. My father, Raymond Marsh, sold industrial fasteners for a company that no longer exists. My mother worked the front desk of a dental practice for 29 years. We were not poor and we were not comfortable, we lived in the exhausting middle, where every purchase was a negotiation and every luxury came with a lecture attached. I learned early that money was a language my parents spoke fluently but couldn't afford, and I learned to listen. My grandmother, Ada, lived 4 blocks over in a narrow blue house with a porch that sagged on the left side. She was the one who raised the part of me that mattered. She'd been a bookkeeper for a machine shop from 1961 until 1994, back when a woman doing the books meant a woman who knew where every dollar in the building slept at night. Ada didn't waste words. She'd sit me at her kitchen table with a ledger and a pencil and she'd say, "Numbers don't lie, Evie. People do. That's why you learn the numbers." She said other things too, things I didn't understand until much later. When I was 9, I sat on her porch swing after a bad afternoon. My cousin Melissa had gotten a bicycle and I'd gotten a card, and my mother had spent the whole drive home explaining why that was fair, and Ada handed me a glass of lemonade and looked out at the street. "You're going to spend your life being underestimated," she said. "Don't fix it. Use it. Let them think you're not counting. You count anyway." I didn't know it then, but she was describing my entire future in 2 sentences. The family math was simple and I was on the wrong side of it. Melissa was the bright one, the one they photographed. I was the reliable one, which in my family meant the one you could ignore because she'd never make a scene. When Melissa needed money for college, there were meetings. When I got a scholarship to study accounting at Kent State, my mother said, "Well, at least that's practical, the way you'd say it about a mop." I was 11 when I first understood that being useful and being loved were not the same currency. It was Christmas morning, 1991. Melissa opened a stack of gifts, and when the paper had settled, my father turned to me and said, "We figured you're old enough to understand we can't do everything for everyone. You get the practical stuff." My gift was a set of accounting workbooks and a calculator. I remember the exact model. A Casio, gray, with a solar strip along the top. I didn't cry. Even then. I said thank you, and I meant it, because I was already the kind of person who understood that a tool is a tool, and a tool in the right hands is a future. Ada was there that morning. She watched the whole thing from the doorway with her coffee, and later, in the kitchen, she pulled me aside. They just handed you the only thing in this room that'll still matter in 30 years, she said quietly. Everybody else got toys. You got a skill. Don't you ever be sad about that again. I want to tell you about Ada's hands, because I think about them still. They were spotted and strong, and she wore a thin gold band that had belonged to her own mother, and when she counted money she counted it twice, always, licking her thumb, never once making an error I ever saw. She kept a metal cash box on the top shelf of her hall closet, the kind with a little key, and she called it the box that minds its business. I wasn't allowed to open it. I understood, without being told, that it was serious. She died on August 2, 2001. I was 21, a semester from graduating. The funeral was small. Melissa didn't come, she had a wedding to attend in Charlotte and said Ada would have understood. My parents divided her furniture over the phone before the ground had settled. And the metal box on the top shelf of the hall closet was, according to my mother, empty except for some old papers. I believed her. I had no reason not to. I was grieving and I was busy and I was young, and I let the box go the way you let go of a lot of things when you're 21 and the person who saw you clearly is suddenly gone. That's a thread I want you to hold on to. The box that minded its business. We'll come back to it. I graduated. I took an entry-level job at a mid-sized manufacturing firm outside Columbus, and I did what I'd always done, I counted, quietly, while everyone else talked. I got promoted the way water finds the lowest point, gradually and without anyone quite noticing, until one day I looked up and I was the controller. For a company doing $40 million a year in revenue. I married a good man named Daniel Okafor, an electrical engineer with kind eyes and a laugh that filled a room, and when he died of a heart attack at 49 on November 9, 2018, I learned again the lesson Ada taught me on the porch swing, that the world does not owe you softness, and that grief is a private ledger no one else can balance for you. I didn't fall apart. I don't say that with pride. I say it because it's simply what happened. I went back to work 11 days after the funeral because the alternative was the silence of the house, and the numbers, at least, always added up. Which brings me to Vireo Manufacturing and to Gerald Voss. By 2019 I'd left Columbus and taken a position as VP of Finance at Vireo, a specialty components manufacturer in Traverse City, Michigan. I bought a small house at 818 Cherry Bend Road, a two-bedroom with a view of nothing spectacular and a kitchen table where I'd sit in the evenings and do exactly what Ada had taught me. Vireo was privately held, family-founded, struggling. The founder, a decent old man named Walter Hantz, was dying of pancreatic cancer, and the company was a mess of undervalued assets and mismanaged debt. I saw it the way Ada would have seen it. I saw where every dollar slept. Gerald Voss came in as CEO in early 2020, brought on by a board that mistook confidence for competence. He was 51, tanned in January, and he had the specific talent of taking credit for other people's arithmetic. He called me the number lady in meetings. When I flagged that our largest supplier contract was about to reprice and cost us $400,000 a year, he told the board it was his idea to renegotiate. When I built the model that saved us from insolvency in the spring of 2021, he presented it wearing a tie I'd watched him buy that morning at the mall. I didn't correct him. I want you to understand that this wasn't weakness. Ada taught me. Let them think you're not counting. Here is the part Gerald never learned, because Gerald never asked questions he didn't already like the answer to. In March of 2022, I got a call from an estate attorney in Akron named Priscilla Vaughn, 66, who had handled trusts in Summit County for 4 decades. She told me she'd been trying to locate me for some time, that my prior addresses hadn't forwarded, and that she was the executor of a trust established by Ada Marsh in 1998. The box that minded its business had not been empty. Ada had spent 33 years as a bookkeeper for a machine shop, and she had done something the rest of my family never imagined a woman like her would do. She had invested. Quietly, patiently, for decades, in the same companies whose books she balanced, in index funds before they were fashionable, in a modest annuity and a portfolio she'd built $100 at a time. When she died, she hadn't left it to my parents, who would have spent it, or to Melissa, who would have flaunted it. She'd left it in a trust with a single condition: it was to be held and reinvested until I turned 40, and then delivered to me and me alone. The papers my mother had called old were the trust documents. My mother had either not understood them or not wanted to. Either way, the trust had done exactly what Ada intended. It had sat there for 21 years, minding its business, compounding. When Priscilla Vaughn read me the number, I had to sit down on the kitchen floor at 818 Cherry Bend Road. After fees and the long, slow arithmetic of time, the trust was worth $2,140,000 and change. If you've ever been the one everybody underestimated, the one they thought wasn't paying attention, type "I counted" in the comments. I want to know we're not alone in this. I didn't buy a car. I didn't tell a soul. I did what Ada would have done. I called a financial advisor named Theo Brandt, 38, licensed in Michigan and Ohio, and I asked him one question. I asked him whether it was possible to quietly acquire equity in a privately held company through a holding entity that didn't carry my name. It was. It took 8 months. Because here is the thing about Vireo manufacturing that Gerald never understood. When Walter Hantz died in the summer of 2022, his estate needed to liquidate. His shares, the founder's controlling block, 52% of the company, went up for private sale, and the board was desperate to keep it out of the hands of a competitor. They wanted a quiet buyer. A patient one. Someone who wouldn't disrupt operations. They found one. A Michigan holding company called Delacroix Holdings, LLC, named after a street in Akron that nobody at Vireo had ever heard of. Delacroix Holdings acquired the controlling stake on October 3, 2022, for $1,860,000. The sole member of Delacroix Holdings was me. I owned the company Gerald Voss ran. I owned the chair he sat in and the salary he collected and the very stage he was standing on when he decided to fire me to impress 3 investors at the Coventry Hotel. 2 of those 3 men, by the way, were from Anders Capital, a private equity group Gerald had been courting for months, hoping to bring in a growth round that would balloon his compensation. What Gerald didn't know was that Anders Capital's diligence team had already contacted Delacroix Holdings, had already spoken with me, twice, on video calls where I sat in a plain blazer and said very little, because you cannot close a capital raise without the majority owner's signature, and the majority owner had a name they were bound by NDA not to reveal. The third man was Theo Brandt. My advisor. He was there as my proxy. So when Gerald crossed that ballroom on the night of March 14th, glass of scotch in hand, and announced to a room of 200 people that loyalty was a word poor people invented, he was performing his cruelty for the exact 3 men who knew, better than anyone alive, who actually owned the room. Let me take you back to that moment, because I've replayed it enough times to remember every beat. The quartet had been playing something soft. Gerald's voice cut over it. "You're done here, Evelyn. Effective tonight." He turned to the investors with his arms spread, waiting for approval like a dog waiting for a treat. "Gentlemen. You want to know how I run a lean operation? You start by cutting the dead weight." I set my water glass down on the dessert table. Slowly. That was the only thing I did. Theo Brandt spoke first. He has a very calm voice. He said, "Gerald, I think you should stop talking." Gerald laughed. "Excuse me? And you are?" "Theo Brandt. I represent Delacroix Holdings." He let that sit for a second. "The company that owns 52% of Vireo Manufacturing." The color didn't drain from Gerald's face all at once. It went in stages. First the eyes, then the mouth. One of the Anders Capital men, a silver-haired partner named Harold Estevez, 59, set his own drink down and said, "Gerald, we've been in diligence with the majority owner for 6 weeks. You told us the ownership structure was resolved." "It is resolved," Gerald said, but his voice had lost its floor. "Then you know who the owner is," Estevez said. Gerald didn't. That was the whole thing. He'd never once read the cap table past his own line on it. He'd assumed Delacroix Holdings was some faceless fund, a passive check writer that would never trouble him. He'd never wondered why the majority owner had insisted, in writing, on retaining a specific finance executive as a condition of the acquisition. That executive was me. I'd written the condition myself. I picked my water glass back up. I still hadn't said a word. The quartet had stopped. 200 people had gone quiet the way a room goes quiet when it senses something is happening but doesn't yet know what. Near the front, our head of operations, a woman named Carla Denton, 47, who Gerald had passed over for promotion twice, was watching with her arms crossed. Our lead engineer, Sam Whitfield, 61, who'd built half our product line and been called the old man by Gerald to his face, had turned fully around in his chair. Gerald tried to recover. He always tried to recover, it was the only genuine reflex he had. This is a misunderstanding. Evelyn, obviously I misspoke, the pressure of the evening. You didn't misspeak, I said. It was the first thing I'd said, and the whole room heard it because the whole room was silent. You said exactly what you think, I said. You've said it in this building for 4 years. You just finally said it to the wrong person's face. Theo handed Harold Estevez a folder. Inside was the ownership documentation, the operating agreement of Delacroix Holdings, and the single-page consent form Gerald had needed my signature on for the capital raise he'd staked his entire year to. My name was on all of it. Harold Estevez read it. He's a man who reads quickly. When he looked up, he looked at me, not at Gerald. Ms. Marsh, he said. It's good to finally put a face to the signature. Gerald looked at me then, really looked, the way you look at a piece of furniture you've walked past for years and only now realize is a door. You, he said. You own. I own the company you just fired me from, I said. So no. I don't think I'm done here. But I think you are. I want to describe what a mask looks like when it cracks, because I'd read the phrase 100 times and never seen it until that night. Gerald's face did a thing where all the muscles that held up the confidence let go at once, and underneath was not rage and not grief but something smaller and much older, the face of a man who has just understood that the thing he built his life on was never real, and everyone can see it, all at once, in a room full of lilies. Carla Denton, from the front, said clearly, I have a recording of him saying worse than that to me in a stairwell in 2021. HR did nothing. I still have it. Sam Whitfield stood up. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just said, I resigned this morning. I'd like to unresign. And he looked at me when he said it. One of the younger board members, a man named Preston Yao, 34, stood next and said, Gerald, the board needs to convene. Tonight. It went around the room like that. One by one. Not a mob, the opposite of a mob. Quiet, deliberate, each voice a single stone. The people Gerald had made small for 4 years, standing up, one at a time, in front of the investors he tried to impress by making one more person small. Gerald did not collapse. Villains rarely do, that's a thing stories add. What he did was worse, in its way. He set his scotch down on a passing waiter's tray, he straightened his jacket, and he walked out of the Coventry ballroom under the eyes of 200 people, and the string quartet did not start playing again until the doors closed behind him. I didn't watch him go. I turned back to Harold Estevez, and I said, shall we talk about the terms your firm is actually interested in? Because the ones Gerald pitched you don't reflect the company I run. We closed the Anders Capital round 11 days later, on March 25, 2023, on my terms. Here is what happened after, because the aftermath is where the real ledger gets balanced. The board terminated Gerald Voss for cause on March 20th, which meant no severance, no accelerated equity, nothing. Carla Denton's recording, combined with 3 other complaints that surfaced in the following week once people understood the wind had changed, ended any chance of a soft landing. His name got quiet in the industry the way names do. Last I heard, through Theo, he'd taken a consulting role in Arizona that paid a fraction of what he'd made and required him to work for a man 10 years younger. I felt nothing about it, which surprised me. I'd expected to feel something. I named Carla Denton Chief Operating Officer. I brought Sam Whitfield back with a title he chose himself and a raise he didn't ask for. I kept my house at 818 Cherry Bend Road because I like it and I like the table. The unexpected thread came in April. I got a letter, an actual paper letter, handwritten, from my cousin Melissa's daughter, a 19-year-old named Ruby I'd met exactly twice. She was studying accounting, of all things, at Ohio State, and she'd heard some fractured version of the story through the family telephone. She wrote, "I don't really know you, but I think you might be the only person in this family who ever actually paid attention. Would you be willing to talk to me sometime? I want to learn to see the way you see." I wrote back the same day. We talk on Sundays now. Last week I mailed her a calculator. A Casio. Gray, with a solar strip along the top. I told her it was the only gift that would still matter in 30 years, and that she should never once be sad about that. I've thought a lot, since that night, about what Ada gave me, and I think it wasn't the money. The money was just the tool. What she gave me on that porch swing when I was 9 was permission to be underestimated and to let it be my armor instead of my wound. She spent 33 years being the woman who kept the books that men took credit for, and she never once needed those men to know what she knew. She just knew it. And when the time came, the numbers told the truth, because numbers don't lie. People do. There's a metal box on the top shelf of a closet at 818 Cherry Bend Road now. It's the same one. Priscilla Vaughn had it turned out, all those years, the box that minded its business. It's empty now, or nearly. Inside it there's the thin gold band that belonged to Ada's mother, and to Ada, and now to me. I don't wear it. I just know it's there. Some things you keep not to use but to remember. I didn't scream that night in the ballroom. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I just picked my glass of water back up and I finished the conversation Gerald interrupted, because there was work to do and I was, as it turned out, the only person in that room actually equipped to do it. My name is Evelyn Marsh. I'm 43 years old. I own the company a man once fired me from to impress 3 strangers, and I run it from a kitchen table with a solar-powered calculator my grandmother would have recognized on sight. I counted. I always counted. I did it, Ada. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room that everybody walked past like furniture, share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.